Okay. Go ahead and get this started. We're calling the August 22nd, 2019 meeting of the AMATS Policy Committee to order. The time is 1:33. Do a quick roll call. Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Mr. Schutte?
Here.
And Ms. Heil is not here. Short board. So we have a quorum. So Craig, will you please do the public involvement announcement?
Yes, all AMATS meetings are open to the public. If we have a business item, we'll have presentation by staff or a consultant. Then the committee will be given a chance to discuss it, and then after that, the public will be invited to comment.
Thank you. Okay, do we have an approval of the agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Approved by Mr. Weddleton, seconded by Mr. Schutte. Any changes to the agenda? Any objections to adopting the agenda? Okay, the agenda is approved. All right, we have before us the minutes of the July 25th, 2019 for approval. Do we have a motion?
Move to approve the minutes from July 25th.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Schutte, seconded by Mr. Weddleton. Any changes or discussion of the minutes? Okay, any objections to approving the minutes? Okay, hearing none, the 25th July 2019 minutes are approved. Okay, moving into the action items. Agenda item 5A, 2040 MPP comment response summary. Craig, will you be presenting?
I believe Ms. Underwood and Mr. Young and Halen will tag team on that.
Okay, Vivian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Vivian Underwood with AMATS. So for this item, there is a cover memo, there is a comment response summary, and a summary of the summary. We also have a mini PowerPoint for you, and the project list for roadway, transit, and well-motorized. So I had a correction on the cover memo. We did, where it says groups, we actually heard from two groups, not just one group. And the total number of comments is still the same, but so we wound up having 22 comments from two groups and 57 comments from 50 individuals. And at the bottom, the attachment should have read the staff recommended changes with technical advisory committee recommended changes. So we have a quickie PowerPoint. We'll zip through it. We don't want to bore you, but we want to take you right to it. So this is your summary. It's a 2-page summary of the staff and technical advisory committee recommendations that pertain to the projects, what's happening with that. So I will leave it up to the committee, to you all, to decide how you want to go through this. But so how we got to where we are today is we actually had 3 very intensive work sessions with the policy committee, the TAC, and the citizens advisory committee through April, May, and June. And then we released the project list that you all developed together jointly to the public for 30 days, and we got those comments back. And that's what we have summarized with our responses in the comment response summary. And so we're coming today, we took them to the technical advisory committee, and they made their recommendations. And we're asking you today to please review the comment response summary with TSC recommendations with any of your requested changes. And then these will be put into the public review draft of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan that we anticipate for late fall, probably the very late fall. So, overview of the comments we got. We got some general comments. So the comments were spread out over the projects. There were about 15 projects that got 3 positive comments each. And these are the types of projects that resonated with the public when we first were doing our scenario development. And so, not surprisingly, people like them now. Northern Lights lane reduction for non-motorized improvements is an example. The Minnesota Drive Multi-Way Boulevard study, Fireweed Lane road diet, and the Glen Highway HOV lanes. Third, 6th couplet with 5th conversion to 2-way, 32nd and 33rd Avenue, Midtown. These are the types of projects that really resonated with people. Now, there was another group of about 6 individuals and groups who really took issue with the projects generally in the bundle of the Midtown Congestion, and Glen to Seward Highway. And some people characterize those projects as not being in line with our community values. But I'd like to point out that actually these projects, or especially the Glen to Seward, is specifically called out in the long range, in the land use plan. And there's an action item in to do the PBL for that project. It's also one of the highest priorities for the Fairview neighborhood plan. So I don't think it's right to say that it doesn't have any community support or it's not in line with our community values. It probably has a lot to do with how the project is done, and that's a design issue that this MTP doesn't really get into at this stage. So what we are recommending with the technical advisory committee, so these are the bottom line changes that we're making to the project list. And you have to look at them all together to actually see what is happening here. So we're recommending moving out Project 110, which is the Glen Highway Frontage Road Study, from Thunderbird Falls to the Nick Arm Bridge, from short-term to long-term. From Project 115, we're moving the 36th Avenue interchange. Well, I should have mentioned also, we did meet with DOT and PF several times on these projects. So this is what we understood from the Technical Advisory Committee that they wanted us to do. So if we need to make any changes in this, we need to know that today. So 36th Avenue interchange moves from short-term to long-term, and it will be combined with Project 212, which is going to be the Midtown.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I cannot hear you at all.
I'm sorry. Please feel free to move forward. Sorry, I'm trying to
It's very
project.
difficult. I
Sorry.
don't think anyone back here can hear you.
Vivian, none of us can really hear you, I'm sorry.
Okay.
We can't all move.
Okay, I will.
Channel your inner opera singer, Vivian.
Oh, you don't want that.
Reach your outside voice.
Okay, so shall I start over? So on this project list, 110 moves from short-term to long-term. 115 moves from short-term to long-term. That's 36th Avenue interchange from short-term to long-term. And we're changing the project name from Midtown Congestion, Chester Creek, removing Chester Creek. 116 moves from, we're just changing the project description as in the summary. And 134 UMed TDM, we're reducing the project cost to $500,000 from $250,000 in the short term as from $750,000. So that frees up $250,000 in the short term. In the long term, this might sound confusing. We're moving project 217 to the short term and changing the project name to the Seward Highway, Glen Highway implementation. The actual project to do the airport site interchange moves to 216. I know that's confusing. And then 212, Midtown Congestion Relief. We're updating the project cost, adding $50 million for the 36th Avenue interchange. This is what the Technical Advisory Committee recommended approval for. So the bottom line is that this frees up about $20 million in short term. And we were delighted to be able to recommend some projects that resonated with the public into the short term. And those three are up there. Well, 200 is 36th Avenue management, access management, and 310 Lake Otis Dowling intersection improvements, and 321 Tudor Road access management. And we'll add a new project in the long term for Glen Highway tolling for $500,000. So here's the bottom line for the fiscal constraint. We're still fiscally constrained. You can see in the short term, we're just a little bit under. There's more room in the long term still in non-motorized. And we will leave it with the body to decide what to do about that, but there was a comment to add basically a catch-all implementation project for the current non-motorized plan that's being developed right now. when that plan is adopted. So we'd like you all to consider that, see what you think about that. So that is our process. Now, what we need to do is ask you all to decide how you want to use your time today. How do you want to go through the comment response summary? Do you want to do it page by page? Do you want to first look at our summary of the summary for how this affects the projects? It's just whatever you want to do.
So to recap the options, we can go through the 25 pages,
Yes.
a page at a time, or we could look at the kind of the batched 3-page version, the shorter version of that.
You could, but we still are asking for approval of all of the staff recommendations in the larger comment response
Oh,
as well.
which is summarized in recommended changes summary.
So that's, I have 4 pages. That's just this one.
Yeah.
Oh, that won't quite work. I have some recommendations that I worked off in this and some I worked off in the roadway list.
So both.
Oh. But I wouldn't necessarily say go one by one.
Maybe a page at a time.
I guess that would work. I mean, if we don't have any comments,
Page
go
one,
right through
page
it.
2.
Okay, then, yeah, so then you can pick. I just wasn't that organized, I guess. There might be redundancy too. So-
You know, I'm having trouble hearing as well. Sorry, so
I guess we're just trying to figure out how we want to proceed.
amongst yourself.
I would say when I worked through from the staff and TAC recommended changes, but also from the roadway list. So it's not quite either or. So the question is, which went first? And I don't really care. And I don't promise that I'm not redundant between the two, and I hope I haven't contradicted myself somewhere.
A lot of cabinets. Mr. Peterson, do you have any thoughts?
We can go by the summary, or we can go with whatever John would best for him.
I think the summary's going to capture it all. I think we should do the page by page is my recommendation.
And then see if we hit the summary.
So page by page through the 25 sheets?
Yeah, if that's the total number of pages I haven't counted.
You're talking about the comment.
Right, these are the actual.
These are the project lists, not the comments.
Project list, okay,
Yeah.
that would work better.
Yeah, the comments are not reflected in this project list, correct?
Correct.
Okay, the only thing that, the new project, tolling, that's in here, right? So we won't miss that. Yeah, new project for tolling. Okay, yes.
So that's not in these.
Well, at the tolling, I think it's a good idea, and that will be covered in the staff and TAC recommendation, when we hit that one. But it's not in the roadway project.
Might just start there since that's the easiest one as a new project.
For the tolling. Okay.
I'm kind of looking at staff who are keepers of protocol. You want to raise your hand?
So, so this list here, the more 4-page summary, are only changes that staff and the TAC are recommending. This is not everything that's part of the comment response summary. So if there was a comment of thank you for your comments but no change, that's not reflected in here. And the project lists have not been updated because it was a lot of work for staff and we weren't sure what everyone was going to do. So we kept the lists as they were for the public review, except for the transit one, which we updated to add the cost estimates to each project.
But did you get that updated in time?
Yes, we did.
Oh,
It's on your iPad and printed
Oh.
off.
look at you.
That was thanks to Bart and Aaron, who did an awesome job.
Good job, team.
Yes.
So we're at roadway project list?
So to rephrase my question to Aaron and get a better answer, we have items we want to work through off of these big project lists, for those of you following along in the audience. And I want to deal with that separately. First off, though, there is a new project that's not in here at all. That's the Glen Highway tolling study, $500,000 in long-term, in a long-term project. Since that is nowhere to be found, it's a new thing, would it be easiest for us to take that up first?
What's in here? If we do this.
I know it's in there.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you do this summary first, that kind of captures everything. And then anything that's missing from there that you still want to talk about that's from the project list, that might be a good opportunity to talk about it there. The only thing is depending on the changes you would like to make for the project list, it could affect fiscal constraint. So that kind of has to be done it has to all really be done at the same time. The TAC went through and said, page by page, and said if anyone has any comment on this, have the discussion and then move to the next page. So I don't really know the best way to approach it, unfortunately. Maybe going through the comment response summary first and just kind of capturing all that, but that's a lot. So maybe instead do the summary of changes and then go to the project list. Or project list first and then summary of changes.
Follow your lead, Mr. Chairman. I thought I was offering a suggestion to make things faster, but I wasn't.
I don't think we either one. We start with the short one.
Well, why don't we talk about the new project first for a minute? Okay. And then we'll dive into, go to the summary. We'll just page by page on that. And then, Mr. Schutte, do you want to roll into the?
Actually, as Mr. Weldon said, the majority of it will be captured in this, and then whatever we don't, we'll take that up at the end.
Okay, all right, why don't we do that? Okay, so first we'll talk about the Glen Highway tolling study. That's the new project that doesn't show up anywhere.
So you want to start like we make a motion to add them?
It
That's
is,
what I would
it's in
do.
here. It's on the second page of comments. It's,
But it doesn't exist in this.
No, not yet.
no,
Not yet.
It's a new change.
I'm sorry. Yes.
So I believe that is correct, Aaron, or Craig, or anybody on that side of the table. Since it does not exist in the roadway project list, and we'd like to add it, there needs to be a motion to add the project name, the dollar amount, and the term, right? Okay. You want to do that, John?
I'd be happy to do that, but so if we do that, then do we open each item we bring up to public comment?
Yes. Aaron says yes.
Okay, so I move to add a new $500,000 study to look at tolling on the Glen Highway to help with congestion
Long term.
in the short term.
Is it short or long?
Long.
The slide says long.
No, I said short. I think why wait?
Okay. The short term.
Well, it's a fiscally constraint.
Oh, we'll fix
Just
that.
have to move stuff around.
We'll move some stuff.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right. So we have a motion to add a Glen Highway tolling study for $500,000 into the short term. We have a second. So now we are, questions and comments on the committee report. So we'll talk about this one at a time. So my understanding is, and I don't have scripture and verse on this, but state statute or law precludes tolling facilities on federally funded highway facilities. In other words, if I accept federal highway money to build a thing,
Really?
I can't turn around and charge people money that already paid for it through their taxes to use the thing. DNR actually ran into this in one of the parks down south. And it was an issue for them. So we run aground, I think, a little bit here in terms of statute and law in charging tolls on the Glen Highway. That doesn't mean there aren't ways around it through HOT lanes or highway toll lanes. But I would just offer that up for your consideration, that there may be legal barriers to actually doing that, and that maybe what we might want to do is have staff look into that before we obligate $500,000 on a study that may be able to be a non-starter from a legal perspective.
Well, we can still do this, but it would be like a $5 study and you'd have money left over. But, maybe there's someone here could address that, because my understanding is that was the case, but they have made allowances now.
Okay. Eric, do you have information on?
So if you check the comment on the summary, staff is recommending that as part of that tolling study, it also looks at the impediments to putting that tolling study in place. So it would be, what are the legal changes that need to happen to get something like that to go forward? Because it's not saying we're going to toll the entire highway. It could be an HOT lane in the future or something like that. It's kind of trying to keep it an open book as to what it wants. But staff recognize that there are some hurdles to overcome, and we want to look at that because no one's really too sure of everything that has to be done to either change it or that's preventing us from being able to do it. So that's why it's 500,000, because it's just kind of wrapped that all in. It made sense to do it all at once.
Good direction. So kind of a preliminary effort before the actual contracting action would occur. regarding study, development of an actual study.
I thank you for that clarification. Can I ask a follow-up question? How does the Whittier toll work then? The tunnel? That's a toll.
It is. Whittier Tunnel, the property is actually owned by the Alaska Railroad. We just operate the tunnel on railroad property.
Oh, so it wasn't funded with federal highway dollars, is what you're saying?
It gets worse and more ugly. It's actually one of the few events where we have taken federal highway capital funds and converted them into, it's just south of $5 million a year in terms of operational funds for the Whittier Tunnel. Because the tunnel costs about $7 million a year to operate. We only bring in $2 million a year in receipts. So that was a Ted Stevens kind of exception
Special
thing
case.
back in the day. So it's a unique situation. But good point. Okay. Any other discussion on this particular item?
Thank you.
Okay, and we'll open it up to public comment. So we're going to open up that particular item to public comment. It's the proposed action is a Glen Highway toll study for $500,000 in the short term. If you have comments, please keep them to 3 minutes, and please remember to say your name at the front of your at the beginning. Any comments on the toll facility? Yes.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Ralph. This came through the Citizens Advisory Committee. The Citizens Advisory Committee voted, not unanimously, but a majority of the members voted for this study. And you brought up a lot of really important constraints. That's exactly what we wanted this study to deal with, to look at tolling on any lanes of it, all of the lanes on it, and look at the sort of legislative barriers that are necessary. So I hope you support this project.
Cool. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. So what is the will of the committee on this particular action? We vote on this in order.
You can.
Yeah.
I vote yes.
We're doing each one of these.
Do you want to ask any objection?
Are there any objections to adding?
No.
No objections. All right, hearing no objections, the motion to add the Glen tolling study in the short term for $500,000 is approved. Okay, we're going to go back to the summary changes. We're just going to go page by page now. So page 1, starting with item number 11 and 65 at the top of the page 1. Are there any comments or concerns on this particular page? We do need to talk about the bottom one, but exclusive of the bottom one, are there any comments or concerns from the committee on the first 2 blocks of items?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So particularly as it relates to Project 217,
Okay.
given the desire to do the PEL, to do a PEL for the Seward to Glen Highway, to me, this one should be modified. Project 217 should be modified. The language in the project description should be modified to read, after the Seward Glen Highway PEL is completed, comma, then continue with the rest of the language. Sorry, I meant to have it open. So after the, before the word construct, after the Seward/Glen Highway PEL is completed, comma, construct interchange at Airport Heights Road, period. And the reason being that, as I understand it, there are a number of projects in here that could be considered supportive of the PEL, but without the PEL completed and understanding what the full scope of projects will be, this one felt a little premature, needed, I would say, but premature since we're doing the larger study of the entire area. So that was my recommendation, is a change in language that helps people understand that this is a project can be a project of the PEL, but we're going to commit to and complete that project, planning environmental leakages effort first. Does that
I
make
think
sense?
that's an implied statement, but maybe, Steph, go ahead, Vivian.
Through the chair, this is the confusing part. So Project 217, to do the Airport Heights interchange, that's actually moving up to Project 216 still in the long term. When we say move Project 217 into the short term and change the name of it, that is kind of confusing, but it now becomes, instead of the Airport Heights interchange, it now becomes Seward to Glen Highway PEL implementation, without calling out the Airport Heights interchange or any project, any particular implementation project. And I apologize for that. It's the way it happened on the floor. The
So,
GAC.
point of clarification, I think it gets there.
So it stays at the same dollar amount, stays at 50 million, moves into short-term out of long-term, which is reflected here, and has a new name and description.
The amounts do work out.
Okay.
It's just a little confusing.
I think that works for me, John.
So are we, I mean, this is still just a study, PEL, 287 million? Projects.
No, the PEL, includes construction.
So it's the projects that are born of the completed PEL process. One
And
of
this
those
is
being-
all short-term.
So this really it's really, we're moving out 115, which is the 36th Avenue interchange that will become part of 212, thank you, 212. So you could say in its place, is that fair to say? In its place, there will be this other project, Sewer to Glen Highway implementation, PEL implementation, for $50 million.
I mean, in essence, it just sort of adds funds to the pool of project funds that will be available for projects that shake out of this Seward Highway PEL study process, right?
Right. Well, the net effect is we're moving $70 million. No, not dollars. We're not moving any money, we're moving projects. So the net effect of this is that we will free up $20 million for those other projects that we had talked about. And we should have a graphic for this. We should. $115 is about $70 million, the 36th Avenue interchange. The project is going to long-term, but it's only going to have $50 million in the long term. We're not messing around with money in the long term, with project amounts. But because we're moving out $70 million from the short term, it frees up $20 million for other projects. And this is what DOT requested on the floor at the Technical Advisory Committee.
Where are you getting the 70 million from? I see 50 million.
I beg your pardon?
Where are you getting the 70 million dollars?
The
Oh, from a different
Project
project, from
We're
115.
moving that out. You kind of have to think of it all at the same time.
So okay. So 216 is now inclusive of 20th Avenue to Eagle River?
It always has been. We're moving 217 Airport Heights interchange into it, but we're not updating the cost.
216, the way it reads now, is 20th Avenue to 13th Avenue.
Yes, but we're moving up number 217 Airport Heights interchange into 216, but we're not updating the cost estimate.
Okay, so and I'm sure I don't understand this correctly.
No,
Jim's rolling his eyes because he knows I don't.
it's crazy, I know.
216 is now a PEL from 20th Avenue, Chester Creek, to Peters Creek and beyond, or however far it goes that way. And it is a long-term project, and it now has a cost estimate of $287,500,000.
Okay.
We're not, no, and the cost estimate won't change.
If I could, maybe,
It will include, it could include the Airport Heights interchange.
so, Mr. Van Hoek, do you want to clarify? Maybe you do.
Todd Van Hoek, DOT. Our intention here was, and we offered some perhaps changes in some language here. We think the easiest way to clean this up is to delete 217 altogether, because it's moving from the long term to the short term, and most of the description is going into 216. So the part of 217 that's moving to 216 would be adopted into that project, and then a new project, 135, or whatever the next number on the short-term list,
No, it's not 135.
well, whatever the next number would be, 217 would move to that next number because it is being moved into the short term, and then the remainder of the PEL in that project would be under that description. And that way it kind of clarifies 217 gone altogether. Because right now what we're talking about doing is moving 217 from long-term to short-term and completely changing the nomenclature on it. And so it really,
It's a new project.
correct.
And you're saying delete 217 and then
And
redo which
recreate.
one? Recreate a whole new one.
Create a whole new one.
In the short,
Whole new number in the short term.
that would be Seward Highway to Glen Highway connection PEL implementation.
There we go. Oh, it's in here, yeah,
No, exactly right.
I got it.
Is that more clear, Chris?
Except for the move to the short term. That's the part that I'm still, that's the first question I asked that started this convoluted rabbit hole is we're putting things in the short term that are the projects that should be part of the larger planning study. But the planning study is long-term. So that's the part I'm having trouble figuring out is why are we putting short-term projects ahead of the long-term planning process? If we were doing this and moving the new project, the interchange project, and keeping it at a long-term, that makes sense to me. But if that part is what I can't quite wrap my head around, and Aaron's going to help me.
So I guess the confusion here is there is a separate PEL underway right now in the TIP for $5 million for the Seward to Glen Highway connection. That's the planning study.
Right.
What you see in the long term is the actual construction of what comes from that planning study.
And that's number 216.
That's 216. And 217 was also part of that, but that's changing because there was concern that we're doing the planning study right now and it's going to sit there for 8 to 10 years and not do anything. So the idea was to move something into the short term that could actually start with implementing some of the recommendations that come from the PEL study that hopefully will be done in a couple of years. And that's what the change of 217 reflects, is that short-term implementation of some of the recommendations that come from the Seward to Glen PEL. That's underway right now.
And may I ask a follow-up question, Mr. Van Hoek? Why 50 million?
I believe that was the original project. That's what I was just looking for, the original cost of 217 or.
Correct.
Confirmed. That was 217's original budget.
Yeah. As a follow-up to either you, Mr. Van Hoek, or Aaron, if we do that, but we keep it in the long-term category, how badly does that screw you up, if at all?
It'll free up $50 million more in the short term.
But then we run into the problem of we're doing a $5 million PEL right now that by the time we get to the long term to implement it, it's going to have to be redone. Because PELs only have a five-ish, roughly, there's no set term, but 5-year shelf
Butts up right
life.
against it.
I mean, it's going to be out of date by 2 to 3 years. And we've seen how members of the public have come in and said that's difficult to deal with, having that many years stale of information.
So does this move that whole project?
Let me ask the committee a question real quick. We've got 20 to 30 some pages of this. Do you think that this would warrant maybe pausing and doing a working group in the next 30 days?
On this one item?
Well, we haven't even got to Northern Med access
Well, that one's easy.
yet.
This is the complicated.
This is the harder one.
So you think this is we're gonna blow through the rest of the sheets here?
I don't know about blow through, but I think probably faster. We'll be more experienced by that point. I think there might be merit in that, Mr. Chairman, only because, and staff did a great job of explaining it to us clearly here, Up to that moment, though, I was under a completely different operating assumption when evaluating these. And so I'm doing a lot of thinking on the fly here, which I generally don't want to do with $70 or $50 million. So there might be value in, but again, I mean, my central concern is these overlapping timelines and plugging money into a short-term hole when we haven't even completed the planning document yet. It makes me feel uncomfortable, considering that there are a number of other priorities in the short term that are much lower dollars and could be kicked out quickly. That's where I'm hung up. And I can't speak for the other members, but that's where I'm stuck.
Mr. Wilson, would you think that there would be some merit in a working group for half a day to really lay this out in a more understandable, clear way?
I think it would be helpful
Okay.
on this one, particularly because I think Todd's point, just delete 217, we're not really seeing that here.
Right.
And then the implications, I think they have a stale date of 5 years.
They do.
They say.
Mr. Peterson, would that be of value to you to maybe?
Yeah, I think this one is probably gonna bog us down for a while, it seems
Yeah.
like.
Okay. Well, if that's the will of the committee, we can do that. We could request a working group, and we could just get this fleshed out in the next couple of weeks.
Can you guys speak up, please?
We're talking about doing there's a lot of shifting around that isn't really clear right now. So what we're talking about doing is pausing this subject for now and holding a working group in the next few weeks where we can really kind of lay all this out on the table, make sure it's clear and transparent and concise for folks so that we really understand. There's a lot of shell gaming kind of going on here with money, and it's a little disconcerting to approve, 50 million going here, 20 million going here. And anyway, I think rather than making a decision and a commitment today on something that has a lot of gray in it, there might be value in having a working group. We often do that as an AMATS. Both the TAC and the policy committee will get together with the citizens advisory folks and kind of lay it all out and make sure where everybody's clear about where we're going with this. Does that make sense, Matt?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a follow-up question for staff? So, or you or staff, I don't know who answers this. If we pull these two items out and say we're going to have a working group to work through these two items, can we continue through the rest of the document today, or most of it today, or as far as we can get today? And if, as a follow-up question, if this is the path that we take, what does it mean for the work that you then have to do after this is eventually adopted? Are we going to screw up some deadlines?
Mr. Chair, we will be behind even more schedule, and that's not to put any pressure on you, but we're already a year behind on this project because of how much time it took to do the modeling and the alternatives and all of that,
Okay.
which we hadn't typically done in the past. So we can, if you would feel more comfortable doing that. I mean, I did realize myself that this was confusing when we were putting the PowerPoint together. It makes it sound like we're moving Project 217 to the short term. Actually, what we're doing is, as Mr. Van Ho said, is basically filling in where 115 was.
I can be next week.
Yeah. I think we stick with that.
But I mean, we can go through the rest today. We're
Well-
putting this whole thing off.
We've got to have the whole thing where it needs to be to approve the thing so they can move forward writ large with the thing. So we're either complete or we're not complete. So we can spend the next hour or two going through one-on-one of these with these folks. Or we could just hold the working group, tackle the big things, go through the rest of it, make sure everything's clear and ready for publication.
If we went through today, then they'd have some idea where we're coming from on other stuff.
That was my thinking too. So, you're going to keep your eye on the bottom line, as you should, and at least if we work through some of the other items, some of which do have fiscal impact, it would help you, it'd set the stage for you to understand where we are, where we need to be once we dive into this PEL.
Mr. Chair, I would like to remind everybody, though, that we did have 3 work sessions with the joint committees. We spent over 6 hours developing this list of projects. And the end result is that we just want to have DOT wants to have an implementation project in the short term for the Glen to Seward Highway PEL that will expire before the end of the short term. And that's the net effect, and then it opens up $20 million to add 3 other projects in the short term that do resonate with the public for other types of projects, those 3 that we mentioned. And if there's any way that we could clarify that, make it easier for you to get a handle on that, we would really appreciate being able to move forward with this and have the projects list firmed up. I mean, we can work on the rest of the MTP document, in the meantime, but it just makes, it's gonna make that much harder. It might be the first of next year before we'll have a public review draft, which is very challenging, because then we have to go through planning and zoning and the assembly, and if we miss our deadline this time, we will be in trouble with possibly missing out on funding in projects, or not being able to do the next phase of a project. And it's just not good form. But it's definitely up to you.
Do you feel comfortable muddying through this, or do you want to pause, or what's the will?
No, I appreciate that, so thank you. Well, if I saw 217 deleted, we can see which project that is. Number, whatever the new number would be, created, dollar amount, call it short term, and then show how much is freed up. I mean, just really clear, because I don't really, what we're working on here doesn't present itself very well that way.
That's why we did the PowerPoint. I wanted to, in the PowerPoint, there's that second slide that basically tells you, bottom line, those are the changes. Slide 2. Is it 2?
No, I understand it.
It's slide 3.
So,
See that, but that's the confusing way.
so I actually do have the Excel that we use to help with determining things here. If you guys would like us to go through that in order to show you kind of what's happening as you kind of talk about a project. So, what would it look like if we deleted 217 just straight up? I probably wouldn't put project name or description, it's too complicated right now. But it'd be like, okay, we delete that. What does that do to the long term? What's left in the short term? We can go through all those if you guys want, and you can see kind of what the effect is on the program as we go, if that would help with moving forward today.
John, what do you think?
For every project?
As many projects as you guys want to.
Keep track.
You
We
can try
will
that.
write it down and do it.
Keep track.
Okay.
What would you like to do?
So through the chair, so on this, so basically on long term, where it says 217, that's going to be basically a new project in the short term. With a different name and everything. But it's related to the Seward to Glen Highway, so we didn't want to make it seem as if it's a completely different new project. It's related, but it's going to have a new number and a new name in the short term. 217.
And I think we understand that, Mr. Chairman. I think we understand that part. It's the first time we're seeing things, and it changes the calculus, at least in my thinking, when I reviewed the comments, because I didn't understand that it was going to be pulled out as a separate new project, renamed and rescoped the way that it's been proposed. But I understand what their purpose is. Again, the hang up I have, and I understand the overlapping or lack of overlapping timelines on the PEL. That's the part that just doesn't feel right, that we're pre-programming a lot of dollars. So that's where I am stuck. Now, I think another way to look at this is, as staff has indicated, they've freed up, because of the money that's been freed up in the short term, they were able to add projects, which we saw on her slideshow, and those are all, look like great projects. We approved one for 500,000, or however much it was earlier. It is possible that we could reduce the amount for the PEL implementation new project to a level that feels a little more comfortable, therefore freeing up other short-term dollars so that some of those other priorities that didn't make the cut, that could be easily implemented short-term projects can be elevated. And that way, at least then, we're spreading the money across both, not shovel-ready, but projects that are scoped and ready to go quickly, and then still leaving a pool of money for PEL-based projects that can come online after that process is done. I don't know, how does the group feel about that?
So don't move, are we talking $287.5 million?
No,
Can't be
just
that
the,
much.
just the 50.
Only the 50 is moved to short term.
Yeah. Yeah, the 237.5 stays in long term, at least as recommended.
And what was your, I'm sorry, so that moves 50, but you want to free up some.
Well, I was just saying, yeah, I was just saying that, given, this is purely from my perspective, but assigning $50 million in the short term for PEL-related projects for a PEL that's not completed yet, it's hard to support that. And so I thought perhaps one way to help make it more palatable is to reduce the 50 million in some capacity, so that what you can spin off of this is also a number of other smaller dollar short-term projects that have nothing to do with this, so that we are definitely getting short-term construction stuff happening, as well as leaving the pool of money there for the longer term.
So you have specific short-term projects that you have in mind to, besides the ones we already.
And this is the danger of doing this on the floor, right?
Right.
It's
just that we're making sausage.
Yeah.
Through the chair, Mr. Chair, excuse me. One thing we do need to be mindful of is the color of the money
Right.
and what kinds of projects that can go for it. And we did check that. We're very close on short term with how much of AMATS allocation funding we're using. We are using about $30 million, $25 million to go towards DOT projects. Remember, this is a cooperative planning process.
Mhm.
So that's understood that AMATS might do that on some occasion. It's quite different in the long term. But, so we're just asking you to please keep that in mind.
That don't mess with DOT projects.
That would be, well, a lot of this is based on a statistical allocation within AMATS that DOT sanctions. So let's say, on average, DOT executes $100 million worth of projects within the AMATS boundaries. The AMATS allocation of that is only 27 million and change. So you can say, it's like you giving your kid an allowance and the kid wants to spend your money too, right?
It's a formula.
It's a formula thing. So when she says, and I believe that's what you're talking about, color of money,
Yes.
right? But this is just a proposed way forward. It doesn't mean that DOT may or may not be able to execute or implement some of these projects. And we've talked to that before. If, for instance, Midtown congestion hasn't seen fruition yet, lane reductions on other major arterials would be problematic for us. And we brought that up time and time again. So it can still be a project in here, but we might not be able to execute it if we haven't been able to resolve our traffic congestion in other ways. Sure. So Does that make sense?
Yep. I get it.
So how would you all like to proceed?
So you had some projects, you wanted some of that 50 million.
Nothing in particular. I mean, the first thing I jumped to in my mind was there's a catch-all. So for those of you following along in the audience, on page 5 of the roadway project lists, MTP Project 131 is sort of a catch-all for short-term MTP implementation work. And if you look at it, you can see there's countless ideas in there. And unless I'm misunderstanding this, staff, this is sort of a catch-all where that money, whatever amount is allocated in the short term for these projects, it can go to any of those or all of those. So, you've got, I didn't count them, but probably 24 projects listed, or potential projects listed here. I understand that there could be others added to it. So take that $7 million up to $10 million, and then suddenly you've got money to get through all of those. That's a lot of planning dollars, but that's really where I'm coming from, is there's other projects like that are in here that are identified short terms where we can get more bang for them with more bucks. And those can happen right away. Just food for thought. I could be the only person thinking this
We
way.
could move on from this first thing.
Sure.
Go on to the next one, see where we land. Because basically you're moving, with this thing, it's moving 50 million for highway to highway to short term. So when the PLL's done, you can get some stuff on the ground and not have your PLL go stale, right? So if that were 30 million, does that get where you want to be?
We'd have to defer to DOT and PF on that.
Right.
But potentially, I mean, it's not like, oh, it's totally a deal killer either, right?
Well, that was the question I asked Mr. Van Hove, and he said that was the cost estimate of it at the time. But when you said it, I think you were referring to the interchange project, not specifically to projects that support the PLL, correct?
Correct. If you look at the scope of 217, the original scope, but the TAC had changed that to include implementation of PEL projects. So that's where we are now. So the assumption being that the $50 million from 217 would be moved to a new project for implementation of PEL.
But that dollar amount was established previously when we were looking at an interchange. So when we're talking about just implementation dollars, could be any amount. Could be higher, right?
Sure.
I say we move on from this complicated thing and say
Okay.
that.
Come back to it.
We're going to try the second item on page 1.
And it's still young.
Okay. All right, now I'll just let you scan through that for a minute.
For discussion.
Yes.
Okay, great. I've got some discussion. Okay. In particular, on it's hard for those of you following along in the chart. It's that a lot of these projects are grouped together on this line, so bear with me as I go through it. On project 115, the recommendation is to fold it into project 212. And move that into the short term. Is that how I read this? Is that correct? I'm sorry, in the long term, keep it in the long term. Which I think is fine. I would like to support moving project 115 into 212. However, I would like to reduce the funding from $70 million to $50 million. And that 20 million, I'm gonna set aside for now because it comes up in a later item that I'd like to add it to.
That a motion?
Not really, kind of discussion. Tell me why I'm wrong, Aaron.
I just have to ask something. So 36 interchange is being moved into 212, and 212's cost estimate is being updated by only $50 million, because that's all that was available in the long term.
Say that one more time.
It's horribly confusing, I'm sorry. So 115 is being folded into 212.
Right.
Okay. And one of the other things is to update the cost estimate of 212 to reflect that folding in of that project. The only money that was available in the long term was $50 million,
Oh, where did I get 70 from?
because that was the original cost of it in the short
In
term.
the short term.
It's right there. So-
But there's not $70 million available in the long term. So it was recommended to do whatever was available in the long term and fold it into 212 to update it for that project being added in.
So
Because we're still trying to adhere to fiscal constraints with everything.
it doesn't just magically create 20 million.
Okay. So that MTP 115 should be 50, not 70.
Yeah, it's 50 if we do 50 full term to the long term, because that's all that's available.
Well, yeah, that's what, yeah, thank you.
But we moved some stuff, potentially we'll move stuff out of long-term to short-term.
Right, if you go back to,
We don't want to back up though.
actually, I don't know how far back you want to go. on this.
Well, there's what this first item we wrote. Right, but that moved money from long-term to short-term. But you already factored that in as a whole constraint, right?
Correct. Because when you move project 115, you basically are deleting project 115, and you're taking the 36 interchange and adding it to 212, and then updating the cost estimate with whatever's available in the long term. That frees up money in the short term. It freed up about $70 million in the short term. But if you add the new project for the Seward to Glen Highway PEL implementation in the short term and apply 50 million of it, you only have about 20 million left in the short term. So that's why these two are kind of linked with each other, because they're really just swapping projects and leaving about 20 million extra in the short term to fill with some of the other projects we recommended moving in.
Okay. And,
Sorry, go ahead.
well, if I can try and flush out my thinking for Mr. Jonglin to critique. The reason I was making this recommendation of reducing it by 20 is because there's a project later in the roadway project list that, at least in the comments, is one that's important to the community, but it's in the illustrative category now. And the intent was to move it out of illustrative and into short-term to take advantage of that freed up capital. So that's where I'm coming from in saying I'd like to reduce it by a set amount. It's to fill it with a different project. So I guess really my question now is, now that there's only 50 million available for a project that was originally cost estimated at 70 million, if we only allocate 30 million to it so that we leave that 20 million aside so I can try and get it in later on this other project, is that enough for the project scope? Now that it's folded into the I guess, Mr. Van Hoek.
No, I think the estimates that they're showing in the project list, sorry, Mr. Van Hoek, DOT. The projects that are shown in those, in the project list are estimated, thought process through the DOT staff when they develop those projects. So anything you short out of those, you risk shorting that final project.
But you're already, at least as the recommendations from the staff and TAC, you're already going to be shorted 20 million anyway.
Well, we're actually excess.
20 million.
In short-term.
Yeah, they moved a $70 million from short-term to long-term. They replaced it with a $50 million thing, giving a $20 excess.
In the short term.
In the short term.
And then they
Okay, so, but
recommended,
the full 70 project cost is, or at least what you estimated is funded.
and then there's your 20 million.
Yeah. But, okay.
Does that cover your
But theoretically, well, no, there's already projects that speak for it.
That's what the tax return is.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, with the tax is
And we've approved action.
500,000 of it.
Through the chair.
Yes, ma'am.
One question we might ask is how much does DOT and PF actually think they could program in the outer years of the short term of that money? So, because we've been talking about that, what is programmable, what is reasonable to expect that we could program? And we have a tip right now that is going to basically take us into 2.5 years worth of tips, just working on the projects we have now, which is mind-blowing. So if you ask DOT to think about in those terms too, I mean, so this.
What can we deliver? Is that what you're asking?
I think we have to think about that. I mean, I think that's what Mr. Schuette's asking is, maybe, I don't know, but
Sort of.
it's nice to have it, but so if we did an interchange, if we did the Airport Heights interchange, for example, even though it's in the long term, would that be do you really think that you would do that? In the short term, or maybe start it and finish it in the long term? Would that be doable?
Mr. Van Hook, DOT. Interestingly enough, we are currently working on a new STIP, and we are also currently working on a 10-year plan. Our directions right now from both federal highways and from the DOT commissioner are we are over-programmed for the 10-year plan, and we are to reduce projects that we are currently showing in the 10-year plan. So to your point, anything that is requested that isn't currently in there is going to be extremely difficult to fund in either short term or long term.
Unless,
Right now, there's no money.
unless we relieve you of the burden of having to do other projects.
No.
Okay.
It's not easy. This is
I
not easy.
don't know if that answers your question or not, but there's very little money available for anything. As a matter of fact, to that point, the last time we scored projects in relation to this whole tip, we as a DOT took Tudor Road, which is part of the Midtown congestion, as our number one priority for the region. And it scored the highest statewide. And when we got done with our process, they said, thank you very much, there's no money, it's not going anywhere. And so we've added no projects. We've had 3 amendments to our STIP, which is normally what the process we used to add projects, and we've had no additions. And there talk right now for the future STIP, which is coming out this fall, we just began working on this week. There's no anticipation right now of any new projects or any new starts. That's how restricted we are right now.
10-year plan. This might be to Todd or anyone else, but, so we have this, this Midtown congestion relief is, I think, very controversial now, but usually, as you know, once you're at the last point, it'll explode. I don't think this community in any way, shape, or form wants split grade highways in the middle of our town. The rest of the country's tearing these things out. They're destroying their cities, and we are planning to build one. And when people see it, it'll explode. And if you think you're gonna do your PEL and then start building it because you got 30, 40, 50, $60 million there, you're gonna use that to, you're just gonna have, the city will explode. I don't think it'll happen. So it'll move it to the long term or lesser to or never. Because everything, I looked at the website, every single one is some split grade thing, and people don't want that. So you're saying you can't build it anyway?
Through the chair. I and others from Central Region have attended several briefings from the PEL and from the consultant community who's worked on that, and we have specifically told them to not necessarily advertise a construction schedule because we cannot confirm. As a matter of fact, I brought this up at the TAC presentation, if you recall, when you were there. Their advertisement schedule is not based on any actual dollars to build these things. So they may have it ready for construction, but they don't have any money to construct any of these things.
think what he's saying is we can plan a list and a stack of projects fiscally constrained based on a notional allocation within AMATS plus what the state normally spends. But the federal highways has demanded we finish Cooper Landing in the next 6 years. That was a $350 million bill we weren't counting on. We still have a ferry replacement bookmark for $250 million that still hasn't been removed from the STIP, even though we can't get beyond the Buy America things. So right now, we're running over $300 million in ACs, I think, and it's going to bump into $400 million here.
What's AC?
So what we can do is we can move funds from future program years ahead or advance construct those funds or AC those funds into prior years. It's kind of like a credit card. So we can use our credit card and advance things in the near term. But when you start getting into levels where you're approaching the amount of the total program allocation you've already got on your credit card, that becomes worrisome to Office of Management and Budget and to the federal highways.
So as far as the PEL going stale, we're doing that now and it'll be done in a year and a half, something. And then, so we want to move money to the short term so that we have money to spend before it goes stale. But we're hearing you might not be able to do it anyway. I mean, we need to slow down this PEL. So it takes them 7 or 8 years then and leave this in the long term.
Part of what can pay for the project that we're showing in the short term could be AMATS money.
Right, AMS will always get its allocation. You always get your 27 million, whatever the number is. It's just whether or not the state has the ability to program other AMATS projects, given the fiscal constraints of the STIP.
So I have before me the possibility of using an entire year's allocation of AMATS money for split grade highway in the heart of our town.
Nobody wants.
Well, we don't really know. Part of what it's going to be for the Seward to Glen Highway would actually probably not be looking at using AMATS allocation for the split grade, but any improvements that could be made along Fairview in that area that aren't the split grade, because that would be DOT's responsibility to do. So if there's some kind of improvements to Inger Gamble we could make in the interim, that's what it would be looking at possibly implementing. We just don't know until the PEL's done.
I think the PEL is scheduled for a year from now, is that right?
It's scheduled now.
But I mean, it's for completion.
18 months to 2 years.
Through the chair, I know this is a policy level decision, of course, but it is in the, well, never mind, I'm sorry. I'll withdraw that.
Don't be bashful, you always have great insights.
No, thank you. Well, we have had public comment both for and against these projects. We have had some strong comments about build it now. We need highway to highway now. We need, we got to get these things done. And it's not just one-sided. And we've had, it's been pretty balanced. If you used to go back to the charrette that we had, we don't have millions of comments, but I mean, it's pretty balanced on what we've heard. So I don't think we can characterize it all as, I mean, from what we've heard at least, that people hate it, let's move it out. Move it out, and that would mess up DOT's scheduling, because it has to be in our tip for them to move forward, keep working on the PEO. And there is the danger that they might say, well, fine, we'll spend our money in Matsuboro. We don't have to spend our money in Anchorage. And that's fine. That is the truth. So maybe it would be wisdom to let them finish the PEL and just see what happens with it, without wasting all the money they've already spent investing in this project, in the PEL.
Well, I'm okay with doing the PEL.
Yeah, the PEL is really an effort to try and identify barriers to project development, right? In advance of a NEPA or the environmental document process.
The only reason I delay it is because we don't want to do it and have it go stale and start over again, close to the PEL. But if it's done in a year and a half and you can't do anything for 5 years, oops. Is that right? We're back to square one.
But that would be on us because of our programming limitations. Not
Waste
because
of
AMATS.
public money.
I would let somebody else kind of, I would let the process define what that direction that project goes. But I wouldn't preclude it from an AMATS MTP.
Okay, where are we here?
Well, let's see if I can bring it back full circle. So, as I outlined to the group earlier, my interest in number 115 was that it occupied space that I thought could be reallocated to other projects. And I understand the intent behind folding it into 212 because it's basically the same thing. Actually, the project description is almost literally the same thing. And I'm fine with that. I still believe that these are duplicative. They're both the same thing. So we're taking 212 from $1 amount to a new dollar amount. And I think that from the comments we received from the Citizens Advisory Group and others, there's other projects that are unfortunately pushed further out that could be swapped. I know you're talking about bandwidth issues, but that could be swapped into that short term to take advantage of that extra headroom, in addition to the project staff recommended. And that was my interest in this, is that I think that perhaps during the TAC review, this juggling didn't go far enough, this rejuggling of things didn't go far enough, and there were a couple of things that they missed that are, at least when you read the comments, the issue response comments, are really big priorities for the areas where these projects would happen. And that's my hesitation on this. I can be browbeat by everyone on this board to think otherwise, but that's where I'm coming from. It's inflating the allocation for a project that, as Mr. Wellesley described, we're not sure the community thinks is a good idea, and leaving other projects that are smaller and perhaps more impactful to those communities on the sidelines, and maybe we should switch it up. That's where I'm coming from. So I'll leave it up to the group, but if there was a way to free up that additional short-term headroom, I mean, essentially by just deleting 115, since it's basically 212, that can accomplish that. That can free up that money and put the balance into the MCR. So that was what my original, I guess, motion was going to be.
115 and the 212, like they say, but not pulling.
Well, yeah, so my original suggestion was going to be to fold. I don't even think you need to fold. Again, they're the same thing. Just get rid of 115 altogether, increase the dollar amount for 212 by $30 million, and move project 320, which is $20 million cost estimate, out of illustrative and into short term. Yes. What did I say, short term or long term?
You said short term.
You said short term.
Did I need to say long term? That's what I meant to say, that, long term.
No, 320 long.
That's the Spinoza.
Well, that's what Aaron told me I need to say. I want it short term, but he has to balance the books, and he's saying there's 20 million available in long-term funding, and there's not in short term. So,
Sorry, I'll clarify. So if all you're doing is moving the 115 or deleting 115, that frees up 70 million in the short term. So that's another
50, right?
discussion.
50 million, I thought.
70 total. The
Okay.
project cost for 115 is 70, but if you take our other projects and move it into there, it'd be 50 million left
Okay.
over. But and if you add that, or if you update project cost of 212 by 30 million, that would leave 20 million left over, but only if you removed project 217. Because as of right now, there is no free money in long-term unless you do something with Project 217, which is the Seward Highway, Glen Highway connection, Airport Heights interchange.
How did, that math doesn't work.
And that's what we're recommending through the chair, is the 217 would go into 216.
So if you get rid of Project 115, that'd free up 70 million. If you take Project 217 and move it into the short term, it would use up 50 million of that $70 million and free up 50 million in the long term. So if you made those changes, you'd have 20 million extra in the short term and 50 million extra in the long term.
Okay. And the 20 million in the short term, the math you just did, does not include the list of recommended projects.
If you wanted to do the list of recommended projects, it would eat up that $20 million in the short term.
Right. Okay. So that's how we landed on long-term, John, is the 20 million in short-term is already, for all intents and purposes, spoken for.
We didn't agree to that.
Well, I know we haven't agreed to
Well,
it yet,
not
but it's,
necessarily. If you want
recommended.
to change that, that's your prerogative. I mean, it's-
I recommend you do this to a short term and we get back to this.
Okay.
I'll reach out.
okay,
Right.
I'll go with that then.
Is that a motion? That was the clearest motion.
What's the motion?
Yeah, so my motion, we actually have it written down here. I move to delete MTP project number 115. Should I do them as separate motions, guys, or can I put it all in one big one? What do you recommend?
It's pretty clear.
You're not going to fail, you can put it all as one.
Okay, I'll do it all as one. So that's clause A, I guess. Delete 115 altogether. The second part of my motion is to increase the project, I'm sorry, the cost estimate for project 212 by $30 million, which brings it to 250,125. And then the final part of my motion, if you've been following along, is to move project 320 from illustrative to long-term. I'm sorry, to short-term.
Second.
You want it short term?
Machine long term.
We're gonna get there.
Okay. Yes, so from 320 is moving from illustrative to short term?
Correct.
Okay.
And 212 was increasing by how much?
30 million.
39.
I believe it's 20.
It is. So right now, on the math of it, since we didn't address the first item in the summary sheet, right? Moving 217. So we just broke the bank.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. But you
But
got a
we can come,
plan.
but we can come back to that.
But you got a plan. Okay. All right, so we've got a motion and a second, correct?
Who seconded it?
Okay. We would delete 115, project 115 altogether, increase 212 in the long term by 30 million, and move project 320 out of illustrative into short term at 20 million. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. Now, go to public comment. Yeah. Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. We're going to go to public comment on this particular motion. Again, the motion is to move a Midtown Congestion Project 115 out of short term, or I'm sorry, to delete Project 115 out of short term completely. Increase Project 212, which is Midtown Congestion in the long term, by 30 million, and move the Spenard Road, Project 320, Spenard Road Rehab, Minnesota to Northwood, at 20 million into the short term. So we'll go ahead and take public comment on that. Again, 3 minutes if you would, keep it to that. And your name first, Mr. Van Hoen.
Todd Van Hook, DOT. I once again only caution everybody that you're specifically, when you're talking about midtown congestion projects, moving money around, you're talking about moving money that is really under the authority of DOT. And whether you move it long-term, short-term, wherever you move it, it's really up to DOT to program those funds.
Noted. Okay. Any other comments on this issue? In the back?
James Starlick, DOT Planning. Just wanted to confirm, when you are deleting 115, are you adding the project scope to 212? I don't believe that was made clear in your motion. And $30 million increase on a project that has a cost estimate of 70 million seems a bit of a shortfall, underfunded. But that's for folks higher pay grade than I to determine.
I'll address the first question, if I may. The project descriptions for 115 and 212 are identical.
Any other, is that the end of your comment, James?
I didn't get to the second part
Oh,
of the
you
question.
did? Second?
I actually don't know the answer to it. I actually was looking at Aaron.
Okay.
He knew it. The second part of his question.
About the 30 million instead of the 7 million? I mean, he's right, yes.
Any more comments? Yes.
Kelsey Ralph, Citizens Advisory Committee. I'd just like to urge you to vote for this motion for two different reasons. One, it's consistent with all of the public comments from AMATS's own public outreach process, and it's also been voted on by the CAC with majority support for this action. Thank you. Well, majority support for moving MCR funding into long-term. Not, extra thing, but implicitly we support that.
So to be clear, you like the idea, but the TAC did vote for it? Or
CAC voted to move the Midtown congestion relief funding into the long term. Yes.
But not
Not the
Spinard
Spinard
Road
part.
project?
Correct. To be clear. Thank you.
Aaron, did you have a comment?
Yes, I would like to just clarify about the Spinard Road project. Putting it into the short term creates the kind of dilemma of who's going to pay for it. And one thing you got to think about, when we say that this funding is going to be obligated in the short term, we mean that we're going to get full construction obligation for the Spinard Road. The current tip right now is basically going to tie us up for 8 years for the AMATS allocation because of the dollar figures for the projects. So the likelihood of us getting to construction on this portion of Spinard Road within the short term is not possible.
Short term being defined as?
5 years.
By short term for the MTP is by 2030. So we basically, our tip right now, because the projects are all in design, when we start getting into construction of those projects, that's going to eat up all of our allocation for the next 4 years of the tip that we have based on the cost. I mean, Spinard Road that's in the tip right now is $50 million. That's going to be almost 2 years of AMATS allocation to cover that alone. And then you have Mountaineer Drive, you have Elmore extension, or MLK extension, sorry. What's another big one? Fireweed rehabilitation. So when you kind of factor that in, the next 4 years, so not this tip, which it would be the 2023 to 2025, sorry,
Don't forget Denali.
2027 is tied up with funding. So that leaves about 3 years worth, and that's not enough time to get to construction in a project like the Spinard Road rehab. So if you want to do that, I recommend splitting it up, show a portion of it in the short term and a portion in the long term, which I don't really recommend, or putting it in the long term where it's more likely to be funded.
Any other comments on the motion at hand? Yes, sir.
Pierce Schwab, Bike Anchorage, just wanted to express our organization's support. That motion is in line with our board's desires and advocacy committee's desires as well.
Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Hi, Jay Stange, Spinard Community Council. I wanted to speak in support of the motion. Thank you. I think that an investment between Northwood Drive and Minnesota Boulevard is one of the highest priorities for my community. And I wanted to just take a moment and speak to the public process question in general. I wanted to point out that just recently AMATS completed the Spinard Road Corridor Study. The Spinard Corridor Study was a process that had an excellent public process. There were people, planners from AMATS out in the community. There was a good timeline. Everybody had a really good chance to participate. And today, in contrast, I feel like some of the conversation that we're having about the Midtown Congestion Relief Project in particular, which this motion speaks to, is difficult for the public to understand. Now, I'm not the sharpest knife in the picnic basket, and I certainly can't handle a spreadsheet like Chris Schutte, but I am paying attention, and I have been here listening and commenting, and I'm having a really hard time following the overall process of looking at Midtown congestion relief and highway to highway. And what would be really helpful for me and for my community is if you guys could provide a presentation of the planning process that looks a little bit more like a graphical interface that shows on a map where all of these different projects, highway to highway projects, are located, when the studies are taking place, when construction is, when construction is considered, and has like a timeline and a graphic interface so that we can really see what decisions you guys are making today. I think that this body makes some of the most important decisions that affect my quality of life on a daily basis. And I would love to see an opportunity for more of us in the public to be engaged. This MTP came out in July. My council doesn't meet in July or August. This meeting is happening at 1:30 in the afternoon, and only the pros are here. I don't see a lot of people off the street. I'm sure they're interested in what you guys are doing. Thank you very much for considering this motion. Please support it, and I appreciate your time today.
Mr. Stange, for the Spinard Community Council, you've heard at least part of the discussion today is about balancing our books in short-term and long-term increments. My original motion being short-term, as usual, Aaron convinced me that I was wrong. And given the deficiency of short-term dollars, and if this were to reside in long-term dollar category, do you think that would sit well with the community?
Thanks for the question. I think that the community right now is actively engaged in trying to figure out how to link a number of important projects, and this section of Spinard Road is in one of the most underdeveloped areas in our neighborhood and has a high level of potential. And I understand the funding constraints that DOT has. I've been paying attention to the budget discussions as well. But I'd like to see the priority placed on a short-term project, because I think that matches up with a number of other projects that are underway that are going to be able to be sympathetic with each other in our particular community and be a big support or a big help. So I'd like to balance the two concerns if possible.
That's a yes. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
Carolyn Ramsey, Airport Heights Community Council. We would like to second what Jay said and follow along the line, because all of a sudden there's an interchange that Airport Heights is involved in that is now being talked about. Granted, it was before being moved to short term, and we haven't even seen any of this path of travel. So I'd like to second Jay's comment about something being laid out for the public to really understand what's being said. And I'm done, thank you.
Vivian, do you want to respond?
Through the chair, so Mr. Stange provided a comment that he said they would be happy with it being either moved into the short term or the long term. And I just wondered if you could, is that what you still feel?
Well, through the chair, I feel that in terms of our community's planning process right now, we have a big planning document that's about to emerge in final form, the Spinard Corridor Plan. And in the corridor plan, we've identified tangential zoning and construction projects related to this section of Spinard Road. And we're looking at a 20-year planning process in that document. But we have categorized the Spinard Road redevelopment from Minnesota to Northwood as one of our highest community capitalization priorities. We feel like it's one of the original projects that we'd like to see. So I would prefer short-term, and I'd like to make sure that my request isn't impossible. I'm a reasonable man, despite what some might say.
Any other comments on this proposed amendment? Is your hand up, or
I think she's just elevating.
Oh, you're just elevating her.
It's still swollen, but
Oh,
I'm just trying to find a place
I
to
know.
stick it. You should see the other person.
Good, okay. All right, if that's all the public comment on that, I have to shoot back to the committee.
I'd like to, I don't know if I offer a friendly amendment to my own motion. I'd like to modify the final part of my motion to actually read, moving project 320 to, from illustrative to long-term, not short-term.
I accept.
Any other,
Thank you.
second? Any other discussion? Okay. And this is in recognition of the fiscal constraints on the short term and
Correct.
the ability to execute?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to go back out to public comment. If you heard the friendly amendment to that, it was to move it from
Short-term.
short term into the long term, but still from illustrative, so it's still a move overall. Any comments on that particular action by the public? Nonverbal thumbs up, that's good, okay. Any other comments, concerns? Okay. Motion has been made, public comment's been taken, it's been seconded. Any objections to approving this motion?
No.
Okay, so that motion is approved.
Thank you.
So, back to our page one.
That was the hard stuff.
Hey, Jim, can you go plug the meter for me? It's that white bar. 2-hour meters now.
I know.
Killing me. Okay. Item number 3 on page 1. This would be the northern access to UMed district.
Oh, wait, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry.
We didn't completely finish the recommended changes to project number 116.
Gotcha.
Midtown congestion relief again. God, it's the same description. At any rate, there's a recommendation to update the project description in 116 for the committee to look at. In that last column there, the TAC recommended change.
This is a right-of-way acquisition.
And I don't know what the will of the body is, I just wanted to highlight that we still have that one to deal with.
Thank you. Okay. Any discussion on this proposed language change?
I hate it. I'm just to be blunt, I hate it.
Tell us how you feel.
Yeah. So this ties into the same concerns I've had with the other items we've discussed about the phasing of projects. And I am very uncomfortable including right-of-way acquisition for a project that's 18 months away from being complete, that we don't know exactly where it's going to go. And the right-of-way acquisition that's being proposed for the Midtown Congestion Relief Project through Tudor to Chester Creek is phenomenal. And boy, I have a lot of heartburn about adding that specific language at this point, or the dollars at this point, given how massive that is and the ongoing work in the PEL world. So I don't have a formal motion yet, but oof,
Some discussion.
that recommendation, that's a hard one to swallow.
Sure. And I'll probably ask for some input from staff on this. One of the concerns I know expressed during the PEL process from adjacent business owners along the corridor is that the specter, I guess if you will, of this project is affecting their property values and their ability to conduct their businesses where they're at right now. In other words, if you're the Williams and Kay or the Subway store along there, or the Allen and Peterson's, the appliance store, These folks have come to DOT and expressed concern about the viability of the businesses, their long-term planning efforts, their property values, in such that if this thing moves forward, be it 5 years from now or 10 years from now, their ability to maintain that business and their property values is problematic for them. I think in part what this does, and we'll get some clarification, is it allows us to acquire some of these properties who would just as soon be acquired and be able to move on and go establish themselves in other places. So it may look a little bit ominous from a language perspective, but I think it is in response to property owners adjacent to that corridor's concerns. We also have available properties, for instance, on the northeast quarter of the Tudor New Seward interchange right now, right adjacent to Charter College. That parcel's been for sale forever. Again, that property owner feels the impacts of the job or the PEL that's in process right now. But that aside, Mr. Van Hoen, do you have awareness on?
You go too far away. Todd Van Ho from DOT. Yeah, it's my understanding, this is probably better addressed formally or more efficiently through the project management team running the PEL, or actually maybe Jim when he returns. But from what we just received a briefing from the PEL, and the anticipation is this right-of-way acquisition and the actual description that's in this project is part of every single option that the PEL is currently addressing. So it doesn't matter what the public finally decides as to which option PEL choice they make. This right-of-way purchase and these frontage roads are contingent in all phase, and in every single phase. So that if we're going to move forward on PEL at all, or Midtown congestion at all, this is the first and required step in every selection.
Yeah, in response, thank you for that. And I understand, we've heard the concerns from property owners as well, and I fully understand if PEL comes to be what it looks like, how big it is, and what you need to scrape off in order to do it. That's the part I have the heartburn with. And I personally, we've been approached by several of the same people that approached you that have said we're in limbo. Only when they come to us, they're not saying buy my property, they're saying stop this stupid project. So you're getting the same request from a different angle. And that's where I have a hard time including specific language that says, yeah, I'm going to come in and buy your building in maybe 5 years, 6 years for a project that we don't fully know is going to go. And if it does go, if any of us will be alive to see it completed. I think that's unfair to the community. I think that's unfair to those property owners. And I'd just as soon not put them in our sites with funding. And that's the heartburn I have with this one, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Wells?
Following up on that is you have, for all those years, essentially vacant land right in the heart of our city, just becoming more and more derelict. And this is what we see in the Ingra Gamble thing, is there's so much limbo there, we don't know what's going to go on. No one's going to put money into those buildings. It's going to be foolish to buy them, because it can be torn down, and you're not going to pay what you put into it, So it's, these projects are so big and so speculative. We set ourselves up for creating ghetto right through the heart of our city, either one way or the other, by leaving it alone or by building big interchanges, spaghetti bowls of highways in the heart of our city. So when would these right-of-way acquisitions start then? Like now, even though the PEL's not done?
Through the chair, it's my understanding that the current project funding, which is primarily state funded, has enough money to finish the PEL and do a large portion of the right-of-way acquisitions, or at least start on some of the right-of-way acquisitions.
So could this be amended to say that, no, you won't do that? There will be no right-of-way acquisition until the PEL has a preferred alternative?
Well, that'll have to happen anyway. We won't start anything until the PEL is completed, which is going to be anticipation of the public review or final draft is, I believe, September. September, October of this year. So we're really literally weeks away from having a final draft for review.
Review by who and how?
John Linnell, DOT. I'd offer one clarification to Todd's statement. The property at the corner of Tudor and Seward Highway, that may advance because a portion of it may be needed for the Tudor Bridge. So that one may be an exception.
Yeah, good point. And that's part of a separate project anyway, right? The Tudor interchange project. Is that, you have your hand up this time?
I didn't catch Mr. Wellington's last question.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, what's the, so you're saying September, an alternative's chosen and off you go, or?
Well, the draft is.
Draft, public draft.
So then it goes out to comment again, and the public can comment on that.
So we're wrapping up the final stages of the document. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other, we'll get to public comment in a minute here.
I just had a public comment / question, but not really a comment. I sit on the Midtown Congestion on the citizen section. When DOT says there's enough money to buy acquisition or to buy the right of way, is that the commercial or the residential side? Because we were told that there's gonna be a lot more money to buy commercial acquisition than there was the residential. So I think that's a fair question to ask. Which one do they have enough money to buy either way, or only buy one?
I don't know how that decision process will play out about whether they buy the commercial or the residential.
I know we don't know that, but when DOT says there's enough money in that project to buy it, is there enough money to buy commercial right away? We know there would be enough money to buy residential.
I don't know that I'm sorry.
As I stated, I believe in the last briefing we got from the PGL group that there's, and the project manager, there's enough state money in that project to start to purchase right away. They didn't define where they would start or how much money is going to be available, but that would be an option available.
Can't be very much, we need another $200 million.
Yeah. Any other committee discussion on the purchase of right-of-way for future improvements language?
Just again, reiterating, I have a hard time justifying $200 million in the short term to go out and buy property for a project that we don't know is going to happen, and that if it does, it's going to create a ghost land for 2 decades, at least as the project has been presented to us thus far. I have a lot of hesitation about that and would be interested in either removing this entirely or some kind of redefining language as Mr. Littleton has suggested. I urge the committee to think about that before we move on.
Okay, Mr. Wilton, any more comments from you?
Well, so, and this is really just to approve a change in wording right here that has the right of purchase. Is that what it's saying?
Yeah. Yeah, all of the project description language for MCR projects are basically copy and paste jobs. They're all identical. This one adds specific language to the $193 million project ask, dedicating it to the purchase of right-of-way, as well as some other interim projects. It's the most concise project description yet of where the MCR money is going, and I don't like it, to be blunt.
Well, we don't even have to move it then.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's a really good chance we'll end up getting stuck with this property if we do acquire it. And so, yeah, I'd be in favor of amending that language if we can figure out how exactly to do that.
Any other discussion?
Can I ask him a follow-up question?
Yeah, sure.
How do you mean, Pete, adjusted how?
Well, I mean, if you know, if we're moving this project further, I mean, eliminating it or moving it further into the future, you know, if we put it into illustrative or something, then, you know, then that gives more time to make a decision later on if we actually do, you know, if at some point in time they do think that this mid-down congestion relief has to be done or something. Buys us time.
To staff, what were the time horizons again on short-term, long-term?
Right now, Mr. Chair, its short-term is to 2030.
2030.
Long-term is 2040. There is a draft No, never mind. That could change in the future.
Thank you.
And we're revisiting this again when?
As soon as we finish this one,
Like next month?
we'll be writing the RFP and getting a contractor on board to do this all over again, right after this is approved.
So when we're sitting here again talking about MTP restacks, at that point, the PEL should be complete. And what that does is it renders alternatives for each of them. And at that point, the state can figure out how you would implement it from a budgetary perspective, phases of this. And then they would come back and to AMATS and say, this is how we think this will play out. And then at that point, if this is the will of AMATS, it would be included in the TIP. And then they enter into the NEPA phase, right? More officially, but in theory, the PEL has identified all the environmental constraints on the planning end of things, and the NEPA phase is a shorter duration time. So, just for clarification. So, Mr. Peterson, did you want to propose an amendment to the language here? Is that what your intent is?
I don't know, is it, well, what do we think?
Let me try this. Okay, so we have a suggested updated project description for 116 to read as listed. And I would start that, so accept their wording, but add at the beginning, after the PEL and NEPA process, identify an alternative. Is that what you call an alternative?
Yeah.
Or route
Yeah,
forward?
preferred alternative.
Preferred alternative.
Because that's the point in which, as opposed to right now, what I think the ask is that to move forward with state funding as available for advanced acquisition between Northern Lights and Benson specifically, because that's the 116 project lines.
This way though.
Vice going into the NEPA process, and then once the NEPA preferred alternative is identified and the NEPA document's approved, that initiates the right-of-way phase, where at that point, we would just use federal funds to buy the required right-of-way identified in the preferred alternative. So what this is, in a sense, one way of looking at it, in other words, is really for property owners who are more than, assuredly, like Allen and Peterson's going to be nicked by this thing, and they want relief now. Or we wait through the official NEPA phase, and we go into more of a federal process where here's what the property I need, you own the property, here's the offer.
And that's okay, that's normal.
That's a normal process, yeah. This is more an advanced action. I believe it was based upon the wishes of some of the property owners. I think there's some activities going on the other side of the road with Fred Meyer's to the gas station. Wendy's there, and actually there's 2 gas stations right there.
Can I ask a question? For the Rogers Park Community Council, I'm sorry, Airport Heights Community Council, neighbor to the Rogers Park Community Council, have your councils looked at the Midtown Congestion Relief Project and/or issued resolutions one way or the other about it? And if so, can you summarize those?
Right off the top of my head, we did pass one resolution. I think we kind of quasi-passed another one. But our main resolution that we passed said it had to be undergrounded. We were not okay with anything being elevated. And the other part of it was that we backed Rogers Park very strongly with the directions that they were going. And we will fully support Rogers Park with whatever direction that they feel because of the impact to them. But the big thing that came up in the meetings in Rogers Park we brought forward and we agreed is not just taking the eastward, not just taking the west side, but actually taking both. As far as leaving Rogers Park alone and taking the strip mall on the west side of the street. Across from Rogers Park, there's a Chevron, a strip mall. Looks like an old Amarillo strip mall or something. It's been there forever. But taking the less desirable looking parts of Anchorage, taking them down. And even if that means the corridor is not as straight through with a little bit of a wind. And we fully back that without a problem because why not go kind of a back and forth thing and take where there is land instead of just only taking left or only taking right / east-west?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, that's good.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just looking at the time, clearly we need to extend this meeting, I would think, if we want to continue working on this. We do have another business item and an informational item, so obviously it's up to the committee, but something tells me you're not going to get finished in 7
We're on
minutes.
number 2.
Yeah, that's why I'm mentioning it, so.
I offer to work.
These are the hard ones, though.
They are.
That's what you said when we were on number 1.
So,
You have to resolve one.
yeah, we would need a motion, a second, and vote to extend the meeting to whatever time you want.
Move to extend to 4.
Second.
Seeing no objection, we're here till 4.
Okay.
I'm just gonna double check that it's not being used.
I don't believe this really.
I don't think it is, but I just wanted to be sure.
Do you want
So you want to amend the
to,
language?
yeah, do you want to restate your amendment?
Pending completion of
Yeah, I thought it sounded good, John.
Sure, so I'd amend the wording offered by the TAC to add before purchase right-of-way, after the PEL and NEPA process
Has identified a preferred
have
alternative.
identified a preferred alternative.
Okay.
Purchase right-of-way.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
Second.
Get it?
You have to put it, before you start motioning, you have to put it out to public for public comment.
We make the motion, then we
I
go
thought
to.
we made the motion, then public
Then we
comment.
comment.
That's how we've been doing it all day.
How would they know what to comment on until they make a motion?
I need to speak through the chair, you might include their comments in the motion, too, unless you're going to do several amendments to the
Okay.
motion.
So we intend to make a motion that sounds just like that.
Usually it's closed the public
Any other
hearing.
discussion at the commission? No. Okay, to public comment, we have a motion that currently the TAC recommendation for 116 is to, quote, add purchase right-of-way for future improvements from Tudor Road to 20th Avenue and extend Seward Highway frontage roads. Project would include interim projects identified in the Midtown Congestion Relief PEL. Projects would include non-motorist improvements and consider adjacent land use. The proposed amendment to that would be to add, upon completion of the planning and environmental linkage study and NEPA document preferred alternative. So that's the amended action. Is there a public comment on that? Again, 3 minutes in your name, please. She has 2 hands up, you only have 1 hand up, so.
Well, you may have something that I may want to tag on to.
Oh, okay.
Or whack, we'll see.
Okay, go.
Todd Van Hub, DOT. Through your discussion, I sense still some confusion on this project, which we're all there as well. But if I can clarify some of this, again, the $190 million that, or whatever's in the project is not necessarily right-of-way. That's all-inclusive. What the envision is, once the PEL is done and we get a preferred alternative that the community supports, we can use that project money to implement any part of that PEL that it can fund.
Thank you. Any? Okay, Carolyn?
Go ahead, Jay.
Just a quick comment. Jay Stange, Spinard Community Council. I also serve on the Citizen Advisory Committee for the PEL, for the Midtown Congestion Relief Program. And one of the questions I had for the project manager had to do with choice of alternatives and the timeline. We're coming up soon in the fall to looking at alternatives in the PEL. And I asked when the no action alternative was going to be considered because I was confused about that. He said, Steve Noble told me there is no action alternative in the PEL process. However, in the NEPA process, following it, there will be an opportunity for a no action alternative. So I wanted to just clarify that and appreciate this motion in terms of how it clarifies that particular decision-making matrix. Thank you.
And Carolyn Ramsey, Airport Heights, for this. Definitely I agree with what your amendment or what you guys are proposing. Let this project continue and let those areas be defined before we say we're going to buy land. Because otherwise we're saying we're going to buy land, but we don't even know what we're going to get.
Kelsey?
Kelsey Ralph, Citizens Advisory Committee. So every time I've participated in the public participation process, I've been told, oh, it's too late to change that. We've already moved the wheels forward on this. We're already in design, we're already in construction, it's too late. And so I'd just like to applaud you guys for sort of pumping the brakes on this, particularly after a NEPA process, because as you heard from the DOT representative here, is that all of the options under consideration at the moment require extensive right-of-way acquisition and extensive construction. And so waiting until the NEPA process that has a no-build alternative is complete is appropriate at this time. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Here, here.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Okay. Pierce Schwab, Bike Anchorage. We also support this, waiting for the NEPA process. We would be concerned about purchasing that right-of-way in advance of this project and seeing nothing happen, seeing this right-of-way sit. So that's very much in line with our organization's desires as well.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Motion's been made and seconded. Public comment's been taken. Any objections to moving the motion forward? None. Okay, the motion is accepted.
Is there more in this number 2 then?
There's the last.
So the last one,
Construct.
still on page 1.
Update. Project.
I know, and I hate to be the squeaky wheel again, but as I understand it, aren't we supposed to also create a new project? Or is that later in the document? The 217 discussion we had earlier, we have to create a new one at some point. Does that show up later in the comment?
Mr. Chair, would you like to go back to number 1 and revisit that and include that with that discussion?
I guess the better way of me asking that is, can we address the 216 description amendment that's being recommended by the TAC without having to go backwards? Here's why I'm asking, Aaron. You're looking confused. 217 is the interchange project. We have not settled that debate yet, but we're about to make a proposal to update project 216, the description at least, to include construct an interchange at Airport Heights. Is that okay? We do that.
I mean, I guess with the understanding that at some point, some change is going to be happening with 217, otherwise you have 2 projects with
Right.
the same
Right.
description.
But we're okay if we do that now, in this order?
It's just a description change, sure.
We have to open up for public comment, but that's going to be, my motion is to update project 216 description to include the phrase at the end, I guess, and construct an interchange at Airport Heights,
As stated.
as stated here.
Okay. Any other comment before we go to public comment? No? Mr. Peters? All right, we'll open up to public comment again. Again, this is the language to be added to project 216, which would include construct an interchange at Airport Heights. Any comment on that? Carolyn?
Carolyn Ramsey, Airport Heights Community Council, we'd really like to know what that looks like before we say yay or nay. This is the first we've seen anything about it. And it could be anything from tons of ramps to just improving the kind of the quasi mess that's there. So like kind of an idea.
Just as a quick follow-up for those of you following along with the roadway list that we keep referring to, the Airport Heights interchange has been in there as item 217, and I don't know what it looks like, but I'm just going to read it out loud so others understand. It says, to construct an interchange at Airport Heights Road, the project would include non-motorized improvements and consider adjacent land use. And the purpose of this project is safety. It's part of the Vision Zero High Injury Network Corridor, congestion, access, connectivity, and freight. So,
And Chris, this has come up and down, up and down, up and down, and it keeps morphing into different things. So I just wanted to put a general statement out there that because it keeps morphing, we'd like to see what they're talking about.
Fair enough. Jim?
Jim Amundsen, Alaska DOT. You won't know what it looks like until we actually start the process, because nobody knows what it's gonna look like. That's what we have an environmental process for.
Understood, but we've heard everything from interchanges going all over the place to who knows what, and none of this has made a lot of sense.
Until there's money to start the process, nobody can answer that question.
Chicken and egg thing here. I got that going on. Any other comments? Mr. Van Hoven?
Todd Van Hoven, DOT. To maybe better explain to you, that's why we're trying to start the PDL, which we currently have money for now. And that PEL will be part of developing that process.
Would that be to connect, because at one point in time, there was a connection between Lake Otis to Airport Heights?
The
We don't
PEL
know.
will include everything.
Two different things. I mean, just the intersection.
But
Interchange.
the PEL is from 20th to Airport Heights. Correct, Aaron?
Yes. And would also look at what to do at Airport Heights
Yes.
intersection, which could include an interchange, but we don't know.
PEL will tell us what it needs to look like.
PEO goes from 20th to Airport Heights.
And that's
Seward
the
Highway.
short term through the chair. Project 127. Short term.
And what it's supposed to do is look at what are some of the alternatives that could help connect that. So it's not guaranteed to go down Ingergamble. It could go any other route. It's supposed to look at that, provide some options, and then you move into the NEPA process, which helps solidify what alternative you want to select.
Any other questions in the back?
I'm concerned,
Your name, please? Sorry.
My name is Cheryl Richardson. I'm concerned about the lack of options in the PEL studies. I have heard complaints that the goals were not, that the Citizens Advisory Group was not allowed to modify the goals. And now I've just heard that this would help the linkage between 20th and Airport Heights. Well, it's already linked, let's be frank. What the public wants is alternatives to the automobile, and I'm concerned about spending millions more on an option that insists on purchasing right-of-way and making it easier to drive the cars,
Thank you. Any other comments?
our cars.
Let the cars go faster, right?
Okay, so we have a motion.
Hey, Chris?
Oh.
Quick question, we're talking, because, I'm sorry. Give me a first name. 20th and Fireweed? Are we talking 20th Seward? Right?
You said 20th and Airport.
That's
Yeah, you're
Project
saying
Hendricks.
20th and Airport Heights. 20th and Airport Heights actually meets in Airport Heights.
Yeah.
And I know that's not what you're talking about.
That's the confusing part.
So that's why I'm asked, that's 20th and Seward Highway. Okay, that was a question that we were batting back and forth here. Thank you.
All right. Any other discussion? We have a motion, correct?
Was that, you suggested you want to make a motion. You want to make the motion?
I'd like to make a motion that, we talked about it, to
What a surprise.
to update project number 216 description to add the following sentence. Construct an interchange at Airport Heights.
Second.
Any objections? Motion is approved as
So we
noted
finish this.
in the TAC recommended changes. correct?
Yeah.
Okay, those are for TAC recommended changes. That was number 2.
They put like 6 things in each number here. Not my fault, it's staff's fault.
Okay. We're going to move on to item number 3 on page 1.
Question on that amendment you just made. Barbara Carl, interchange at Airport Heights. Airport Heights Drive, Airport Heights and the Glen Highway. I'm not-
Seward.
Glen Highway.
Glen,
I know, okay.
okay.
Nor for DOT.
Airport Heights is the whole area.
I'm sorry. Glenn. Okay, we're going to move on to number 3 now. No more. We're going to move on to number 3 now. We've taken all the public comment for the moment. Did you have a question?
No, this is about number 3. I just want to make a point of information before we start discussing.
We need to start here. We're going to talk here first, and then we'll go to committee discussion, and then we'll go to public comment. That way I don't get confused, and I didn't drink a mocha this time.
You can do a point of information.
Well, the public involvement announcement was we start here if that business item,
Yeah.
discuss it, and then we go here.
We're kinda
So
getting the flow
we're getting a
going.
little loose.
You can, but if you have a point of information from the floor, that comes.
Well, it's up to the chair, I
That would
guess.
come first.
Oh, it's up to you. Wow.
Point of information?
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
So it's just a clarification that the comment response form says that this comment came from the Citizens Advisory Committee, and it did not. One member of the Citizens Advisory Committee made this suggestion. We did not vote on it, and as a group, we did not advance this comment. That's my point of information. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Number 216.
this is on item number
On
3.
216?
No,
Item
no.
number 3, the north
North
access
access.
to University.
Oh, okay.
All right, this is getting easier. So, the item before us, item number 3, the TAC deferred to the policy committee for a decision on this particular comment. The comment is to add northern access to University Medical District to the roadway project list in the long term for $40 million. Again, staff from the TAC defers to the policy committee this. So, what are your discussions?
Nope.
I move not to add it.
Nope, nope,
I'm a third.
nope, nope, no. Okay. Any public
Can we-
comment? I'm sorry?
Okay, go ahead, Herman. Go ahead.
So we all agree that this doesn't,
Right.
okay. We'll go ahead and take public comment real quick on the addition of Northern Access Human District. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Barbara Carl, clarification, you're against it, or I couldn't understand what you were.
They are, right now, the committee is leaning towards not adding it to the long-term list of projects.
Adding it would be premature since there's, in the TDM for the whole area, hasn't been done yet. And that assumes, this adding this would assume that the outcome of the TDM suggested that northern access should be the way to go, and that has not been established yet. So I agree with the committee that this should not go forward.
Any other comments, Carol?
Carolyn Ramsey, Airport Heights Community Council and CRD UMed Chair, hat for both. Multiple resolutions have been passed. We agree with the no, and thank you very much. There are 10 community council resolutions against this road, along with all the work we did. We're done.
Sorry, Kelsey Ralph. Jay Stage asked me to say that the Spinard Community Council agrees with Airport Heights. He left. I would be remiss if I didn't mention his concerns. Thank you.
He had to go pick up his kid.
Proxy stuff. I don't know what the proxy rules are, but okay. Any other comments? Mr. Van Hook?
Todd Van Hope, DOT, clarification, the TMD study is not going to look at anything to do with this highway or this connection or this road. So it's irrelevant as far as the TDM is
The
concerned.
transportation demand model looks at everything but vehicular solutions to congestion. It will look at multimodal, bicycles, pedestrians. It will not consider what motorized transportation solutions are recommended for this. So to be clear, does that make sense?
But to respond to that, the TDM is supposed to say, here are all the ways in which we can free up road capacity by getting people to switch to walking, biking, and public transit. So if you move forward on a road project before the completion of the TDM project, you are assuming that those efforts would not be sufficient. So it is related.
If we hadn't gone through this entire loop already, TDM studies,
Right.
traffic studies, all before, only to have it stopped just before we got through diversion, I would agree with you. But this is a very political project, understandably so. And so we've heard from all the community councils. The majority of the AMATS council agrees with you. From DOT's perspective, I would state that there is, although this is a community decision, there is goodness in the transportation throughput for the UMed area. It is continuing to grow. This project is a valid project, and it will continue to be forwarded by the TAC for consideration. It doesn't mean it'll ever get any traction. But that is, from a transportation perspective, it is a possible solution. So,
And you and I should talk because I have a fabulous idea for you.
oh boy, I am looking forward to that conversation.
All right. Actually, you might like it.
Okay. We need to do this.
Okay, so
Just as a point of order, so we finished page 1, hey guys. Is there anything in B, I mean, we'll run out of time, the draft Eagle River PM 10, should that be, can we jump to that?
We should really get that released for public comment.
Okay,
now.
so that would be good. So I move to change the order of the day to do 5B now.
Do you want to actually do a motion and vote on the UMed first?
let's
Yeah,
let's
let's
wrap the UMed.
No, sorry.
We just wrapped up public
Sorry,
comment.
we have no objection to not adding the project to the MTP, correct?
The formal motion.
Do you need a formal motion? I mean, this, they recommend that we add it, we could just ignore you.
Yeah, we just don't comment.
right? Or would you like?
Well, it's
Lori,
not,
would you like
it's, you know, it's not a very
She
controversial
wants a
subject,
formal-
so yeah,
a
just.
formal motion.
Actually, do the motion in the positive. How do you do a motion in the positive for this thing?
I move not
I guess,
to add it.
well, no, I guess you go.
You just- you just-
I'm going to add it.
We're gonna vote on it by name.
Okay, I move to
We're gonna
add.
vote on it by name to whether or not to add the northern access to the MTP.
So I move to add northern access of UMed to the MTP. I urge a no vote.
So Mr. Weddleton votes no.
I like your style. I'll
Mr.
second that.
Peterson, how do you vote? Mr. Schutte?
Vote no.
And Mr. Young votes yes. The majority rules, the measure fails.
Fails.
Yes.
Fails.
There you go. Thank you.
So it will not be added to the MTP. We are done with page one. On page one, we're going to pause.
We gotta get this released.
Okay, we're gonna pause the,
A motion to table it.
do I have a motion to pause
Mr.
action
Chairman,
items 5A?
I'd like to move to change the order of the day and move ahead to action item 5B, after which point we can come back to 5A.
Looking forward to it.
Have a second?
Second. Okay, any objections? Hearing none, we're gonna go ahead and move to 5B. Craig?
Okay. Do you want me or are you gonna present, Yemi?
Well, whichever way you want.
Okay.
Just do the quick version.
I'll just do the quick version. This is should have a memo there. This is Eagle River PM10. This is the second year of the limited maintenance plan. We are just asking to release this for a 30-day public comment period. We're not asking you to approve it today. We just wanted to go out to the public. This is part of the process that the EPA requires to redesignate our area to an attainment area. Go away from limited maintenance to attainment. This is the second 10-year. They did the first 10-year, and that was a while ago, so the TAC talked about it, said, good idea, it's to you. We just want you to release it for 30-day public review.
Okay. And are you going to present, or is that?
That's it. That's the short version.
That's it.
Okay. Any discussion at the committee level?
Yes, sir.
For releasing
Say I move
PM10?
to release it to public comment.
Can we tell the public comment real quick?
Oh,
sorry.
He might make a motion at some point, Craig, just so you know.
We should make him all this. I thought we would vote, then we go to public
I
comment.
think we make a motion, go to public comment.
Usually, you're supposed to discuss it first, go to public comment, and then make the motion. Come back to your motion.
All right. Is there any public comment on the action item 5B, which is the draft Eagle River PM10 second year limited maintenance plan? Any comment, public comment? Okay, hearing none. We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Mr. Pearson. Motion.
Oh, wait, they're looking at us funny. I think what they would like for us to do is to actually state the motion now that we've had public comment. In which case, I believe Mr. Weddleton's going to make a motion.
I move to release the, what do we call it?
Draft Eagle River PM10 second year limited maintenance plan and associated appendix for a 30-day public comment period.
I move that.
Okay.
Second.
Second by Mr. Peter. Any objection to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you.
5B. We actually got one action item.
Okay. All right, back to 5A.
5A.
That's true. That's true. And the agenda.
Okay. All right, back to 5A. We have completed sheet 1 of the summary comments by the TAC.
Mr. Chair, if you have finished with number 1, could you please clarify for us what you've decided?
For the, I'm sorry, page 1 of the summary comments.
Yes, but the very first item,
Yep.
I don't believe that you came to a conclusion.
Yeah, we haven't come back to it yet.
Yeah, then go back to it, yeah.
Could we
That's what they were
ask that
talking
you-
about doing a work session on.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that in a second.
Page 2.
Doesn't sound like Paul
Page
Harvey.
2, all right. Page 2. I just have a question and clarification for staff. So page 2, the first 2 items, as well as later in the document, item 110 on the next page, are the 3 projects that you presented earlier as being candidates for the short-term funding. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, no, it's 321. It's 110 we're moving out of short term.
I'm sorry, that's the comment number. The project is 321.
Oh, excuse me. Yes.
Okay, so
You're-
200, 310, and 321 are the
Yes.
three that you're recommending to move from long-term to short-term, and that's what you presented earlier.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Now you're coming on page 2.
Well, and if you remember the scintillating discussion we had earlier, this 20 million potentially is already spoken for, right? By these three projects, well, 4, but we already approved one of them. So we've kind of discussed them all, and
Okay.
I don't know that there's a lot more to discuss.
Okay. And these are included in page 2, right?
Yeah.
First one moved to.
Well,
3,
yeah,
10.
321's on page 3, but yeah, we know about them all.
Any other committee discussion on page 2?
I can't make a motion yet, but if I were to make a motion, I would be making a motion on both the first 2 items here to move project 200 and project 310 from their previous categories to short term. Do I need to do them individually, or is that okay? Group them?
Okay. Get back to basics here and see if Craig agrees with me. So we have a motion on the floor. Are there any more committee discussion?
I have a question on this. So the staff recommendation for 200 is change it to a study. Was there, yeah, $1.5 million, is that? That's not enough to really do much, but is it $1.5 million study? Is that what we're saying here?
Correct.
So it was intended to be a study all along, but it didn't say that?
No, it was originally intended to be the actual work, and when we looked at it, we realized it wouldn't be enough to do anything. So the point is to have a very robust study for there. The cost estimate can change, but we were just trying to deal with fiscal constraint at that point, and just leave it at 1.5 million for a study.
And what you're looking at is there's lots of roads going on to 36. You want to minimize the driveways and so on going onto it?
Driveways and roads, so you're trying to make it to where it's free flowing for vehicles, buses, future buses, as well as non-motorized users, so there's less conflict points where cars are turning into driveways or in and out of driveways and stuff, and put it on secondary access.
So $1.5 million study and engineering, or is that just a study?
I mean, it could be study and some work from the project if you know.
Okay.
I don't know how much it would take to implement access management along 36th.
Okay. So I guess we'll kind of take these one at a time. So those are the discussions related to number 200. Are there any public comments on the first line on page 2, which is move project 200, 36th Avenue access management from long-term to short-term? Yes.
Pierce Schwal Bike Anchorage. This is a project we were really excited to see. We think it's important to include funding for construction. We think there's a lot of safety concerns there, and if it was possible to move 200 to short-term and include money to actually shelves in the ground, I think that would be really important.
Okay.
Just to clarify, I don't know if you know this, Pierce, or if maybe staff needs to chime in. When you looked at it and said, well, 1.5 doesn't get as much, what's the number that gets you much?
I'm not sure. For example, a Tudor access road, or a Tudor road access management study from Seward to Patterson is $42 million.
Bang.
For the actual project work, the implementation of access management, not a study. I'm like, I'm in the wrong business of $42 million study.
All of you. Okay.
So more than likely 36th Avenue, doing the whole list of it would be 20 million plus. I'd be way more than 20 million.
It's only 10 million.
Okay, so maybe some fiscal constraints playing in there.
Thank you.
Any other comments on project 200? 36 access? Kelsey, I know you got something to say.
do, I always do. I second Bike Anchorage. I think it's a good idea to actually do something, but I recognize the challenge of fiscal constraints. That's why I strongly suggest moving things into the long term that are related to the congestion relief project.
Any other comments on item 200, moving into the short term? Okay, what is the will of the committee?
We're doing both these together, 200, 310.
Well, I
I think staff wants them
I
individually.
think we're doing one at a time.
So you move 200.
Yeah, so my motion was to move project 200 from from long term to short term and change to a study.
Second.
Seconded. Any objections to doing that? Hearing none, the motion's approved. Next item, item 310, Lake Otis and Dowling intersection improvements, from moving that from illustrative to short term. Comments or questions from the committee on this one?
Just, if I may, staff, that's a big leap from illustrative to short term. Walk us through your thinking.
Mr. Chair, we just took into account public comment, frankly, and these are the types of projects that the public has indicated that they like and support. And this is going to benefit non-motorized. Now, we have heard from DOT that it may not look like we're thinking it will look like, hopefully, because there will be right-of-way impacts to the veterinary clinic and to the school, perhaps. So we have to weigh all of that, but we won't know unless we get the study done.
Okay.
And
So the 5 million funds a study, or does it fund the construction?
The construction. Construction.
This is we got this cost estimate from our partners at DOT, so we hope it's, we trust that it.
Well, it looks like what you're trying to add, if you compare Lake Otis and Tudor to Lake Otis and Dowling right now, you're trying to turn it into a Lake Otis and Tudor, is that correct? Because you've got the same lane counts right now at both interchanges, you just don't have the islands.
Exactly.
So you're looking for the refuge there, the
That's
islands, so you've got a larger radius sweep on the curves.
We could move it into non-motorized as well.
No, I think his question is just on the cost estimate.
If you look at the utilities vaults that are there on the south side of Dowling, at that interchange area, that's that $1 million pole transmission lines. Yep. There's a ton of vaults right there. The only real option for us is to move to the north. We've owned a lot on the northwest corner. We got McKinley fence, I think it is, on the northeast corner. When we pushed through the last version of Dowling, was all we could do not to avoid a total take on the McKinley fence, gentlemen. This would most likely result in a total take, the additional movement, and it would have to be to the north. I'll be honest with you, I think 5.2 million is a little skinny, given the utilities and the rights of way constraints there. Mr. Amza?
I think comment that was just made should be taken into account. This is a non-motorized project. The beneficiaries of this are not the motorized traveling public at all.
Okay.
I disagree with that statement, if I may. If it's supposed to be like Tudor, that's a huge benefit to the car traffic. As somebody who turns on that street all the time, it's much better for me. I'll probably be in a car. So I disagree.
Any other discussion on that?
This is your world, your experience, and you say it's skinny. Yeah, it's a little short. Are we comfortable with that? I think it's a great project. I'm worried about the money.
I want to jump up the two down because I'm the one that did the cost estimate, apparently. But I think it'll be a challenge to get that all done in 5 minutes. But anyway, any other committee comments before we move to public comment? Okay, any public comment on item 310, Lake Otis and Dowling interchange improvements from illustrative to short term? Hearing none. What is the will of the committee?
I make a motion to move project number 310 out of the illustrative category and into the short term.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Schutte, seconded by Mr. Weddleton. Any objections to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Okay. Page 2, non-motorized projects. We have MDP number 508, Northern Lights Boulevard lane reduction. And the following projects. We and the list goes on. So, staff recommends updating the information for projects 416. Happy Drive. Committee discussion on this one.
If I read it correctly, and I rarely do, as Aaron points out, these just look like sort of clerical corrections for updating source information and does not impact the scope or the cost estimates of the projects.
You're
Right.
correct.
So
These are just clarifications is all.
It's just clerical change, but we want to make sure everyone knows that we're
Yeah.
making these changes.
Any other committee discussion on this? Any public comment on the clarifications noted in items 27 and 46 on page 2 of this summary? Hearing none, what's the will of the committee?
Move to update the source information for projects 416, 426, and 430 to read 2019 through 2022 tip.
So recommend approval of staff.
Yeah,
changes.
sorry, yeah, I can just say that. Recommend we adopt the staff changes.
That's shown. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Shudy, seconded by Mr. Peterson. Any objections to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion's approved.
Much faster way to say it. Thank you.
Item 62 on the comment summary response sheet. And the recommendation to move the following projects from non-motorized to motorized. Non-motorized reconstruction, motorized lane reduction, Raspberry, Minnesota ramp improvements. Any discussion by the committee on these moves from non-motorized to motorized?
Aaron, what's it do to our map?
So what's being recommended, so originally what happened is these three projects, 503, 508, and 511, were in the roadway table, and during a work session with the TAC, Policy Committee, and CAC, it was recommended they be moved from the roadway to the non-motorized table. So that's what was done, and as you can see, the recommendation here is to move it back from non-motorized to motorized table. That's the comment. Staff's recommendation is not to do that, and instead is to just update project 503 to be more, to clarify more of what 503 is intended on doing.
Thanks. As a follow-up, Mr. Chairman. All right, as a follow-up question, if we disregard your recommendation and we do move it, what does that do to our map?
Well, at this time, there's no money for it, so we'd have to find the $22 million in addition to the $30 million we have for the other project.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, we'll move to public comment on the item 62 on the summary changes, page 2. Any comments at all? Ms. Richardson?
My name's Cheryl Richardson. I've had a concern for many years now, and this is one illustration of that concern, that AMATS can make better use of its money depending on which source it uses to finance which projects. We've tried to explain to some assembly people about how you can actually purchase replacement budgets, replacement buses with capital operating dollars, but the funds need to be flexible. This is one opportunity to flex some dollars to put more money into non-motorized projects. I would say it's a problem. I don't know, did you say $30 or $50 million problem? So give it over to staff and allow them to figure it out. Make some recommendations back to the policy committee.
Okay. Any other comments on the motion?
Can I ask a question of the commenter? Sure. Cheryl, appreciate your comment, your viewpoint. Maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but don't you see this as a way of doing what you described, not specific to transit, but of leveraging what essentially should be motorized project funds in a non-motorized project fashion? Does that make sense? Maybe I'm just not explaining myself very well. I think this is a great way to ensure that we remain fiscally constrained, but also get some great non-motorized projects that have motorized benefit So
Okay.
it's kind of leveraging, maximizing your dollars. Do you not see it that way?
Now I've lost my place in my writing.
Never mind.
But what I am trying, if I'm saying this incorrectly, then that's my purpose also, is to boost the available dollars for non-motorized projects. That's my end result. Perhaps I misunderstood. I thought that would leave a major hole in the budget that had to be filled, and I was recommending if you find such a hole, simply have staff offer you recommendations on resolving it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Mr. Van Hoen?
Todd Van Hope, DOT. I'd just like to remind everybody here that this is a DOT facility.
Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none, what is the will of the committee?
Move to accept the staff recommended changes as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to accept staff changes by Mr. Schutte, seconded by Mr. Peterson. Any objections to approving the motion? Mr. Welton? No objection. No objections. Hearing none, the motion's approved.
Mr. Chair, we are over our 4 o'clock limit that we extended to, and I know there's a meeting started at 4 here that wants the room.
So I flashed the 5-minute warning to the scheduler. I'd like to make a motion to extend for 2 minutes so we can finish page 2 here.
Yes.
Second.
Closure. I like it. That's good. Let's just do it.
Still leaving number 1.
I thought you meant 5 o'clock when you said that.
No. I wish.
Jim, go plug the meter. Okay. All right. Last item on page 2, item 67. Recommending remove the following projects from the illustrative: widening of Northern Lights Boulevard, widening of UAA Drive. Reason being, public wants AMATS to pursue alternatives to the automobile. The illustrative list should explore ambitious projects to meet them. Okay. Committee comments?
Great idea.
Just a question, so this just says they're just taken out?
This is gone. They want to remove it from the illustrative altogether.
Okay.
Any other comments? Questions? Comments from the public on removal of these projects from the illustrative? Yes.
Peter Schwab, Bike Anchorage, we fully support this removal.
Any other comments? All right. Hearing none, what's the will of the committee?
Move to remove project 312 and 324 from the illustrative list.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Mr. Peterson, moved by Mr. Schutte. Any objections to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Okay, we did not go through the entire list. How much? We got pages 3 and 4 still. Craig, we didn't get through all of it.
What do we do, Craig?
So we can do, if you want, we can do a work session on that first project on the first page. We can then continue this meeting. So we can do a work session maybe next week, maybe we'll see when we can figure it out, and then continue the meeting and just come back in for this and finish this off. So I can coordinate with your schedules and try to figure out when to do a work session and when to do a meeting.
So let me ask a follow-up question. Because of our public notice procedures
Have to do a work.
for the group that's in the audience, can you tell us all of our timelines? As far as how much public notice, when is the earliest that the continued meeting could occur, et
Yeah, we
cetera, et
have a
cetera?
1-week requirement for business items on our agenda, so we would have to give a week's notice for the meeting, not for the work session.
Right.
I'll get the poll, find out what your schedules are like. As soon as I can find out when we get a time, we'll get it posted on our webpage. We'll send it out to our email notification list for the work session and the continuation meeting.
So if I can finish my thought, let's say we have our work session a week from today, which would be next Thursday, and we're good. We're like, okay, we understand it all now, we're ready to do it. You would then publicly notice the AMATS meeting for the following week, 7 days
What I
later.
would like to do is see, if I can get next Wednesday works for a work session for you, maybe I can schedule the committee meeting the following day, and that will give us a week's notice for the continuation meeting.
Oh,
So we need to have a week's notice for the continuation meeting, but not necessarily for the work session.
Okay, so you just need 7 days to publicly
Yeah.
notice the next meeting date, and we
Yeah.
can meet anytime as the work session.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, could we not, just combine them? Because I think we're getting pretty close to our understanding of that
We
first
can
issue.
absolutely do that.
So if we just listed detailed discussion of that issue,
Yeah, we can do a work
have a
session
policy
from
committee meeting.
2 to 3 and a committee meeting from 3 to 5.
Let's do that, and then I'll email, I have some I worked off of the project sheet, so I can just email those to you. Say, here's some things I was thinking of, so you'll be prepared for comment on it.
So what motion do we need to make to continue this meeting?
Well, through the chair, I would like to ask that if you send them to staff, that you also send them to everybody else.
Yeah, I
on
don't
policy.
think we're.
Let's just save it for
Because
Okay.
it really
We need
makes
to get
it-
out of the room, so
yes,
we'll
it
do
just
that.
really
I need
makes
to
it
know what
difficult.
motion do we need to make to continue this meeting?
So, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to continue today's meeting to a date no sooner than 1 week from today. That actual date and time to be determined by staff as they look at our schedules.
Okay, we have a second to the motion?
Second.
Any objections? Hearing none, the motion's approved. Okay. And we need to get out of here. All right, so, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Do I have a second to the adjournment?
Second.
Hearing none, any objections to the adjournment? Hearing none?
Thank you.
Thank you, the meeting is
Who did I? It's gonna be a mad rush down.